I'm taking over for Emily today. She's unavailable today, so I'm going to be serving as the moderator for today's webinar. I just wanted to reiterate the purpose of the webinar that Emily has defined, which is essentially to connect people. The biomass industry is growing pretty quickly, but it's still quite diverse in terms of expertise and also geographically kind of fragmented all over the country. So her goal was to bring people together to answer common questions and solve problems to advance the industry in a sustainable and very importantly, a profitable manner. So, Evan, can you go to the next slide potentially? I think she has a slide with yeah. So the stakeholders of the biomass industry are quite diverse, and we also have quite a broad coalition of support for this webinar series. So I wanted to acknowledge that. We are supported by the Department of Energy through the Center for Advanced Biofuels and Bioproducts Innovation, or CABI. Also, the USDA provides funding through the Diverse Corn Belt Program. iRegen provides both private and institutional support. And we're also, from an institutional standpoint, there's support that comes from the University of Illinois and Iowa State University with various departments and programs. I think the next slide has the schedule. The next seminar will be September 4th. Billy Murdoch is going to be talking about erosion control with Miscanthus. And I think that may be the last seminar for a little bit. So make sure you guys mark your calendars for that one. So today we're going to be hearing from Evan Branosky. Evan is an expert in environmental policy. He has more than 20 years of experience at the state, national, and international levels and has worked in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. So basically everything. Evan is an expert in conservation finance and is serving as an advisor to the Conservation Innovation Fund. And today is going to be talking about developing water quality programs for Miscanthus, which I think is an extremely relevant topic, especially for the state of Iowa. So with that, I'll turn it over to Evan, and I'll be looking forward to hearing from it. Thanks.
Great. Well, I really appreciate it, Nicholas. Thank you to you. Thanks to Michelle. Thanks to Emily. And then also, thank you to Travis Hedrick and Tyler Elkins at Agrotech, who I think have been partners of ours now for many years and are partners on each of the projects I'm going to describe today. But importantly for our time together, put me in touch with you all, and that's probably the reason I'm here. So I'm excited to talk. Thank you. Well, hello everyone. As Nicholas mentioned, my name is Evan Branosky. I'm an advisor to an organization called Conservation Innovation Fund. I'm going to provide a couple of slides today on incentive-based programs that we've been participating in the Chesapeake Bay watershed to finance the installation of Miscanthus. I'm going to go over a couple of different topics in the 20 or so minutes that I have. I'll do an introduction of who we are. I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey through Chesapeake Bay Restoration 101 and give you an update on where things stand, as well as talk about the cost effectiveness discussion that's become part of that effort. I'm going to go through a couple of very specific state programs, explain our firm's experience in participating in them, and then I want to conclude with some results of how we've experienced those programs and some significant, I think, accomplishments that we and our partners have had in them using Miscanthus. So as I mentioned, I wanted to start with who we are at Conservation Innovation Fund. We are a nonprofit organization that raises and revolves funding to develop environmental assets on working agricultural lands. And inherent in that statement are a few points. The first is our primary focus over the years has been on conservation practices. These are your traditional approaches like buffers, no-till, cover crops, etc., of which Miscanthus is actually very conducive to performing those types of uh, BMPs on working agricultural land. Uh, Within our value chain, we deliver revenue to farms and absorb risk for government and corporate purchasers. And so our sort of MO is to generate environmental assets, be that greenhouse gas reductions, be that water quality improvements, and find offtake for them. And basically, another way, a simpler way of saying it is we generate environmental assets and we sell them to willing buyers. And I think at the end of my presentation here, you're going to get a good sense for how we do that. We are predominantly operating now in on the East Coast, in fact, entirely. The Northeast states, the Midwest states, and South states, we have some projects in each of those states. But again, today I'm really going to be focusing in on that Chesapeake Bay watershed, and hopefully you can see the distinction I made in the colors of the states that are part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. That would be New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia in the District of Columbia. I'm actually going to get a little more specific and actually focus on our experience in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia for this conversation. So just a little bit on Chesapeake Bay restoration. Going back in time to 2010, that was a very, very significant year in the long history of efforts to restore and maintain the Chesapeake Bay. That was when the Environmental Protection Agency established the Chesapeake Bay total maximum daily load. For those of us on this call that may not have a lot of experience in Section 403D of the U.S. Clean Water Act, a TMDL is something that a lot of people refer to as a pollution diet. For a little bit more detailed discussion below, what you see in that image is on the left-hand side, that significantly high section of the bar chart is the existing load of pollutants that enters a water body. An assessment is completed. There's a required load reduction that is necessary. And then that load reduction gets allocated amongst point sources through waste load allocations and non-point sources through what are called load allocations. And the combination of those two is the total maximum daily load. There's also a margin of safety that's usually added. The Chesapeake Bay TMDL was a Herculean effort. And in fact, at that time, and I think still today, it was the largest largest TMDL of geographic extent that had ever been developed. And so as challenging as it is when you're developing a TMDL to allocate loads amongst those point sources and non-point sources, here in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, that load also needed to be allocated amongst states, uh, amongst the federal government, because the federal government has significant land operations that under the Clean Water Act, they're responsible for controlling themselves, but then also further subdivided into counties and local jurisdictions. And there it got really difficult because under Section 402 of the Clean Water Act, just about every state, I think 46, have been delegated authority to run their own surface water programs. So as you can see, we're dealing with a very, very complex watershed and ecosystem. But for our purpose, going back into the timeline, the reason I'm presenting this here today is because there's some key milestones that really informed the programs that we're going to discuss. Going back into 2010, EPA required the Chesapeake Bay jurisdictions to start to develop watershed implementation plans. This is basically the strategy document for how the states will achieve the goals of the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. For most TMDLs, watershed implementation plans have to be developed at the discretion of the regulator. And in this case, EPA decided to do that. As you can see through the years, the states also had to develop a phase 2 and a phase 3 watershed implementation plan. And those plans did, as I just described, they talked about how these loads were going to get allocated out to different sectors and different levels of government. But they also did something very important, and that's that they determined what projects, what BMPs, what strategies, what approaches each of the jurisdictions would be taking in order to achieve the pollutant reductions required from the Bay TMDL. In 2017, the jurisdictions were supposed to have implemented 60% of the projects and approaches necessary to achieve those load reduction allocations. In 2018, EPA completed what was referred to as a midpoint assessment. And that assessment found that the jurisdictions were actually doing a great job. They had exceeded their progress goal for reducing phosphorus and sediment, but not on nitrogen. And nitrogen is a very important pollutant in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. It's actually the limiting pollutant. And that is in the marine science, the pollutant that really is the driver of eutrophication, which is the significant goal that is keeping the bay from achieving its dissolved oxygen levels to achieve water quality standards in the first place. So it's extremely important to this entire effort. By 2025, yay, this year, the jurisdictions are supposed to have implemented all of their projects. To be completely honest with you, I don't know of their progress thus far. I do know that EPA conducted an assessment last year. I'm not incredibly familiar with the results, but I do know there's active policy and political discussions that are currently in place to determine progress and also what may come next. So as part of this entire conversation, um, the states, I think, very quickly realized going back to 2010 as they were developing those WIPs that they needed to, in addition to looking at the individual contributions of each of the different sectors and each of the different states and the local governments, they really needed to think deeply about cost effectiveness because a business as usual approach for Chesapeake Bay restoration was going to just be prohibitively expensive, multiple billions of dollars. And so the states in their various iterations of WIPs did some very interesting financial and cost effectiveness analysis. And there's one particular analysis that I find very useful, and that's where this image comes from. That was conducted by MDE, the Maryland Department of Environment, going back to 2013. And as you can see, it's a cost curve, and it's a cost curve for nitrogen reduction from pretty standard best management practices or approaches amongst different sectors of pollutant contributions to the bay ecosystem. So you have your standard CAFOs, you have cropland and pasture, you have forest, you have septic and wastewater treatment plants, both public and industrial. And then you also have urban stormwater. What I find very interesting here, and what's very useful for the sake of our conversation, is on the far left, you can see the most cost-effective approach is alternative crops. And I count Miscanthus and at least 3 of the Chesapeake Bay states count Miscanthus as an alternative crop as well. So just pause on that for a moment. When we're looking at nitrogen reductions and the cost of achieving nitrogen reductions, alternative crops such as Miscanthus are the most cost-effective approach for reducing nitrogen reduction into the Chesapeake Bay ecosystem. And that's compared to many other practices. On the far right, as you can see, you start getting into urban stormwater practices. These are engineered practices such as bioretention and filtration practices that require significant capital costs and sort of intensive operations and maintenance over their lifespan. But you don't face sometimes some of those high costs when you're dealing with an approach such as alternative crops, and particularly one such as Miscanthus, which is so good at fixing nitrogen into its various forms, some of which don't pose as significant of a threat to surface water quality. On the right-hand side, too, I just also wanted to note that when you swap out some of those higher cost approaches for the lower cost ones, you achieve these triple bottom line benefits that I'm sure many of you have heard about before: cost savings for residents and government, improvements in water quality, and definitely increased farm resilience. And before I proceed, I do just want to note, because I think it's important, no one, and definitely not SIF, definitely not our partners, definitely not the states, are saying that we should do away completely with urban stormwater practices and replace them with alternative crops. That's not my point here. And in fact, there are significant legal restrictions to doing anything like that. But if we can be precise and we can look at opportunities, well, alternative crops provide a really cost-effective approach. And so, with that in mind, I think the states have taken steps to really support and embrace the use of them. So, really starting back in around 2022, partially because of the results of the midpoint assessment and because of the history of research and work that had been done on cost effectiveness, three states took really decisive action to incorporate and to establish pay for outcomes programs. Starting in Maryland, um, I believe it was 2020, Maryland, the state legislature passed the Clean Water Commerce Act. That set aside $20 million to establish a innovative procurement program called the Clean Water Commerce Account Program. That is a $20 million per year recurring award that is designed to receive proposals from different project proponents and then score them. Now, there's criteria to the scoring system, but the most heavily weighted set of criteria is the cost effectiveness. What is the cost to reduce 1 pound of nitrogen from entering the Chesapeake Bay watershed? There are local water quality considerations as well. So, you know, when I describe the Chesapeake Bay watershed, we're trying to improve that main stem of the bay, which you'll see if you just open any map. But obviously, local water bodies, your stream in a Maryland neighborhood that drains into the bay are important as well. So there's some unique design structures that help support achievement of water quality goals in those local water bodies as well. Um, but again, that's $20 million annually. The first award was in 2024, and I'm going to talk more about that because we feel very fortunate to be able to say that that first award came to Conservation Innovation Fund back in 2024. After Maryland, Penvest followed suit. Penvest is the Pennsylvania Infrastructure Investment Authority, so it's operating on behalf of the state of Pennsylvania. Penvest established its own procurement program called the Clean Water Procurement Program. They awarded $22 million through that program, again, through a pay for outcomes approach, starting in 2022, going through 2024. And then I believe it was in 2023, passed either a state budget amendment or legislation at the state level that established a recurring $6 million a year reward. I believe the $22 million was money that came from some of I think it was the federal infrastructure law or act. But the 6 million is a carve out of state, I think, income tax revenue. And so that should exist in perpetuity. And then finally, the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality established in 2024 its own pay for outcomes non-point source pollution reduction grant program. And through that program, DEQ awarded $20 million in 2025. Now, that was a one-time budget allocation, although DEQ does now have budget authority in the case if any of those projects should fail, they do have the option to basically re-award funding to other projects that submit proposals in the future. So we actually may see some more rounds of funding coming through that program. So SIF has been involved in all of these programs, and we've used Miscanthus in every single one of them. That's what we've proposed as a cost-effective approach. I want to talk just really briefly about our first effort in Maryland. And I know you've heard about Maryland previously, but to be just completely honest, and now our experience of operating in three states, the Miscanthus production in Maryland, I really do think in many ways serves as a very good national model. But I know you've had Dean Lively, I believe, speak about that. So I won't get into too much detail on some of his approaches. But nonetheless, um, we worked with, again, our partners, Agrotech, and two producers on Maryland's Eastern Shore, both in the Choptank watershed, which is one of the primary tributaries to the Chesapeake Bay. And we moved to install 170 acres of alternative crops, i.e. Miscanthus, paired with no-till agricultural practices and also reduced fertilizer application compared to what was in the fields previously, which was a traditional corn-soybean rotation. We also did the same in Cambridge. The primary difference was we just had acreage differences between these two sites. So one was 170 acres and one was 150. So in order to be able to quantify the pollutant reduction from the planting of Miscanthus, we had multiple different options in theory that we could have used. So one option that we could have done is we could have gone out and we could have done soil sampling, we could have done lab analysis, we could have looked at nitrogen soil concentration pre-planting and then post-planting. We could have done it at certain maturation levels of the Miscanthus grass. Or we could have done modeling. And because this was a program that was scoring us based on cost effectiveness, we went the modeling route. Um, the modeling allowed us to save significant amounts of money, but it also, and I think more importantly, fed into the sort of modeling framework that is used to evaluate progress toward achieving that Chesapeake Bay TMDL. And that was very helpful to the state of Maryland that we went that route because when they scored our proposal and as we annually are delivering those reduced loads, they can literally take our calculations and our numbers and insert them right into their progress reporting to EPA. So it makes the regulators' lives easier, and it was actually easier for us and allowed us to achieve even more significant cost savings than alternative approaches. But in a nutshell, and I don't have to tell, I think, a lot of this audience that there's devil in the details when you're trying to, quantify pollutant reductions or trying to do complex sort of watershed health analysis. But we looked at the acreage of each of these sites. We determined what the edge of tide factor would be that we would apply in order to come up with our baseline load. Basically, what that means is we needed to determine the attenuation that occurs when we plant miscanthus grass and it prevents nitrogen from getting ultimately into a water body where it ultimately matters. And so there's attenuation, aerial deposition, et cetera, that occurs from that point of planting to the point where the reduced pollutant load benefits the water body. We also had to look at a lot of other site-specific variables that, again, fortunately, we were able to model using the Chesapeake Bay model, which is available in desktop version through CAST, which is the Chesapeake Assessment Scenario Tool. We did that on a county level. And so the Chesapeake Assessment Scenario Tool reports out baseline loading rates for corn soybean rotation and also for alternative crops on a county by county level. Once we were able to apply our acreage, that edge of tide level, and that per county loading rate, we were able to subtract the post alternative crop planting from the pre-planting land cover, and that's how we determined what our load reduction was. I see I'm starting to run out of time, and I definitely want to leave room for questions, but that approach in a nutshell is what we did in each of the programs where we were operating. And again, we've really had a significant amount of success. So going back with Maryland, that winning proposal that I just described was round one of the Clean Water Commerce Account Program. We were able to get our price per pound down to $19.38 per pound. We reduced 71,200 pounds of total nitrogen over a 10-year period. And that was a $1.38 million award over 10 years from MDE. We also successfully applied for round two funding from the Clean Water Commerce Account Program. We were fortunate to receive 9.15 million for 633,700 pounds of nitrogen reduction over 10 years at an even more cost-effective rate of $14.43. Our cost went down because of all of our lessons learned from round one and the cost savings that we were able to get from our experience with planting the Miscanthus grass, but also on the back end, calculating it, doing the methodology, and being able to apply and going through contracting and approval with the state. All of that signified cost savings. And I would even say if we should do Miscanthus again in Maryland in a round three, we may even have opportunity to get it lower. I don't know. There's a lot of variables, but again, it would be very interesting to see if cost effectiveness starts to increase over time. In Pennsylvania, we won successfully in round three of their clean water procurement program for Miscanthus grass in and around Lancaster, Pennsylvania. That was a $1.66 million award that reduces over 100,000 pounds over 10 years at a $15.71 per pound price. And then finally, in Virginia, earlier this year, we found we had won 2.66 million, which is a reduction of 172,000 pounds over 10 years. And our price point there was $15.44 per pound. With Virginia, we were particularly proud because that was the lowest price per pound of any of 9 awarded projects. And it was the greatest pound reduction of 9 awards. I was particularly interested to see that result because we were competing there against different and innovative approaches in multiple sectors. And with DEQ, for example, they had projects that were proposed that were connecting housing developments that were on septics to the residential sewage system, which is a very cost-effective approach, but we beat it. And then there were other approaches too, traditional cover crops, et cetera, that we beat. And that was really interesting to me because I showed you that cost curve that had been done before. As great as that cost curve is, and as much as I think it's truthful or it's true, it's primarily based on modeling and assumptions and the author's best efforts to do literature reviews and compile information. Well, in DEQ, and I think in these other places as well, we're actually demonstrating that the cost per pound of reducing nitrogen through miscanthus planting is actually the cost-effective approach. So we're actually putting real data, real stories, real numbers on the ground behind what we've known for many years. So again, really exciting. I would love to see more states take this approach. I'll just conclude by saying, the title of this presentation is Water Quality Programs for Miscanthus. There's nothing specific about these programs that is tailored to Miscanthus. It's just that the Miscanthus crop and the ancillary benefits, again, that no-till, that reduced fertilizer application makes Miscanthus just such a desirable and cost-competitive approach for achieving water quality improvement that it has a very good chance of winning. And that's what we're showing. So I really appreciate it, everyone. I think we have time here for questions, and I'd be happy to answer.
Well, thanks, Evan. That was great. In the past, people tend to put a lot of questions in the chat, more so than just unmute and ask, but I'll wait and see if anyone wants to chime in either in the chat or with their microphone. That'd be great either way. One question I had just to maybe start things off is what was the background that led to those 3 states really wanting to get in on this? Because Um, I think there's a lot of states that feed into the Mississippi River that could benefit from something very similar to this. I'm just curious what the stimulus was to actually tip the scale and make things start happening.
Yeah, Nick, that's a great question. And that's one of those questions where if you ask five people, you'll get five different answers. But you're asking me, and so I'll tell you what I think. And I showed you that midpoint assessment and the results of it, and that the Bay jurisdictions were doing a fantastic job of reducing pollutants getting into the watershed, but nitrogen was lacking. And I think, also the Bay jurisdictions were well aware of their limitations to achieve to implement some of those cost-effective approaches, substituting those alternative crops for the more expensive urban stormwater. I also finally think that if you look at each of the different source sectors, and this is quite sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Politically sensitive, but at least the modeling has shown that the agriculture sector is the one that had made some of the smallest amount of incremental progress over time. Now, that's due to factors that affect agriculture that don't affect some of the other sources. So there's no judgment in my statement. But I think that Bay jurisdictions saw all of those different factors and they thought, we really want to try to do something innovative to drive reductions in that agriculture sector as much as we can. And through some great efforts through third parties, there's a great sort of organization called the Environmental Policy Innovation Center, EPIC, that did some really great early work in advocating for and setting these programs up. They were successful in adopting it, getting legislatures on board, and I think that that's what ultimately led to it. And also just last point, you know, it's I think very interesting, especially today, in an era of constrained budgets, to see programs that were so successful in their pilot rounds. So look at Maryland, um, look at Penvest, to have a commitment by states to continue those programs through state funding. That's a demonstration of how good these programs are. So hopefully, Nick, that gives you a little more background.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. One question from the chat. Jared Flater asked, do you have any resources for understanding the environmental slash remediation costs for a pound of N lost to the environment? So maybe Jared could maybe specify a little bit.
I just, yeah. Slash cost.
Hey, yeah, I'm working on a project where we're evaluating the impact of cereal rye on reducing nitrogen loss, both to water and as nitrous oxide to the air. And I found some resources for kind of calculating the cost of that remediation. I was just curious if you had any more up-to-date resources. So say like the state needs to remove how many pounds of nitrogen, like what does it cost for them to remove a pound of nitrogen?
Sure. And Jared, if you are able to email me after, I'd be happy to send you some reports from the Bay watershed. Going back again into sort of the probably 2010s up to the 2020s, there's been several sort of cost analyses that have been done in the Chesapeake Bay watershed looking at cost per pound for different practices and different approaches in different sectors. There's probably three or four or five maybe that are really good ones. Now they're getting a little dated, right? But fortunately, through programs like this, also through what are increasing volumes of transactions in nutrient trading programs and also stormwater offset programs, again, starting to get some real data to underpin some of that existing theoretical work. So, Jared, I'll be happy to talk to you. I'll tell you right now, it's no secret the average is $20 per pound of nitrogen reduction. So that's helpful. If you look at basically all of the studies, that's where I think it always comes out as an average.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll send you an email. Thank you.
Sure. I see another question. What would be the total cost to address the end problem in the bay? I don't know off the top of my head. However, it wouldn't be very difficult to find that out. I mean, because what we would want to do, the Chesapeake Bay jurisdictions, starting back, I think in around 2012 or 2014, had to start preparing 2-year milestone reports to show the EPA their progress toward achieving the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. And what we would want to do is look up the most recent one, which was the 2024-2025 one. And basically, you go through, you add up all of the remaining nitrogen reduction necessary, and then we can multiply it by $15, $20, $200. It's a kind of crude estimate, but I appreciate the question because yes, it does start to show you what's the magnitude of getting there. My last point would just be, I believe, Damien, um, keep in mind that with all of sort of these cost-effective approaches to surface water improvement, it's usually the last pieces that cost the most, right? Because at the beginning, that's where you're really trying to get through all of the low-hanging fruit. And so the costs can start to rise as you get further and further along. And that's a factor in consideration that the states are well aware of. But again, an interesting sort of nugget of information, I think, for you asking that question.
Thank you. Are we trying to get out at 12:35 or 12:45?
Somewhere in between there is what we usually do, Nick.
Yeah, okay. Because I remember some of the calendar invites I had were a full hour, so it just wanted to double check. I had one other question or I question slash comment. We're really focused on the cost of taking the nitrogen out, but I was really curious about the cost, the economic impact of the nitrogen going in to the Chesapeake Bay and
Huh.
sort of what the return on investment in terms of saving or preventing economic impact from the nutrients entering the water.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so the costs of surface water impact and degradation in the bay sort of manifest in a lot of different ways. The first is, and probably the industry that's most heavily affected is commercial fishing, because we're talking about nutrients here. The bay has other pollutants, but nutrients are the ones that have been identified as not as preventing the bay from achieving its most important water quality standard, which is dissolved oxygen. So it's that oxygen that keeps the fish alive and the crab harvest alive, things like that. And so there have been some work that has been done to look at the cost of eutrophication, given its extent, the sort of geographic area that algae covers, and then when the algae dies, it decomposes and goes through aerobic and anaerobic decomposition. It sucks up all that oxygen and kills off fish. And so that there is some research that's been done there. Also, recreation is significant, and so sort of recreational sort of boating and even some swimming throughout the bay. You just don't want to do that if the bay is covered in algae. So going back, and the numbers are old now. I think one of the best and last ones I've seen, I don't know, it was tens of billions annually was the cost of the impact of nutrients on the bay ecosystem. And again, Nicholas, I could send you that report. Again, it's old, but if you just translate it from the 1990s when it was done to today's dollars, it's got to be somewhere in that ballpark. So tens of billions has to be approximately right.
Thanks. Andy has his hand up. Andy, you wanna?
Evan, thank you for your presentation and your explanations. I have two kind of questions that are related. Uh, I'm just curious that kind of the reduction factor in your equation for assessing the reduction. Could you give us an idea in terms of like maybe like a percentage what that ends up being kind of on average for Miscanthus implementation first of all, and then for the round three, what would be some things you would need to know, or where what are some areas technologically or agronomically that you think you could do more a little bit more specifically to bring down the number?
Yeah, two great questions, Andy. So, um, I think, Andy, where you're going with your first question is I think you're asking me, is there like a nutrient removal efficiency value that we could apply to Miscanthus production? And there are some nutrient removal values for alternative crops that uh, I could share with you. We didn't use it actually for this proposal. We did a modeling approach that was a little more, I explained how we could have done on-site sort of soil sampling and lab analysis. And then I also explained how we did modeling. The modeling we used was not one where we just applied efficiency. We actually calculated reduced fertilizer applications and sort of soil uptake, again, at a modeling scale, but from converting from uh, corn soybean rotation to miscanthus grass. So we didn't apply an efficiency. It was a different methodology that we used. And that was something that the Bay jurisdictions, ultimately liked. But again, I'd be happy to follow up with you and give you some efficiencies. There's some good books, good guidance manuals that have been developed by the EPA's Chesapeake Bay Program Office that look at the cost, the efficiencies for alternative crops. And then finally, your second question, how could we get that price even lower? And, you know, I, I have to be a little careful here because our colleagues, our partners, Agrotech, shared with us basically their cost sheet. And, in the early stages of making that price per pound, when we looked at what was and wasn't possible, we really, looked at every single cost of goods sold and looked at what could be excluded and could not. I don't want to get into too much detail, but certain things. So like transportation costs, for example, of taking the miscanthus from the field to the end user. For a lot of these, it was poultry bedding that it was ultimately being used for. There may have been a little bit of biofuel, I think combustion and stuff that was done, but again, I defer to them. So it's like shrinking some of that. Some of the overhead rates, so things like I mentioned, for us, SIF, and our partners to literally just do the contracting, people's time associated with preparing the proposal, going through procurement with the state. Again, every time we win one of these, we're able to shrink that down because we're so much more knowledgeable. And especially, what's really interesting is going through a procurement process with each of these states. I mean, it might as well be different countries because each of these states do their procurement differently. So as you learn how one operates, the second time you're in that much stronger of a position. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's those types of things. I think the like things like fertilizer application, there's not a lot you can do there, just simply because the fertilizer application rates are based on, things, costs of production that we really can't affect. You can't, not apply to miscanthus. You have to continue to do it. So yeah, hopefully that's answering your question.
It does. It does. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, I think there's one more question maybe we can get through real quick from the chat. Tim Hughes asked, where do you see the greatest ROI benefits of miscanthus? Buffer strips, if so, minimum width, whole fields, high yielding or marginal soils, kind of where's the best place to put miscanthus to get the best bang for the buck?
Um, it's getting honestly a little outside of my area of expertise. And a part of the reason why is again, these were modeled load reductions on a county scale. And so I I just we just didn't have information on whether planting in a marginal area versus one that's not as marginal, for example, would provide higher yield or not. So that was difficult. I will say though, and in each of these states, we had to report ancillary benefits of the Miscanthus planting. And aside from just the nitrogen uptake, the reduced nitrogen application necessary for Miscanthus compared to traditional corn soybean rotation, we had to report on resiliency benefits, adaptation benefits to climate change, potential sort of flooding reduction. And there, obviously, planting on marginal areas got us the highest scores. And in fact, in our Maryland round one and round two proposals, we had to look at sort of areas that had been flagged as particularly vulnerable to sort of rising sea levels due to climate change on Maryland's eastern shore. And we got some of the highest scores there. That was more granular than a county scale. One other thing that was also very interesting, I thought, was we were actually able to structure some of these projects in areas where they achieved very high environmental justice scores. So traditionally underserved communities. And because of the sort of economic activity that Miscanthus generates. So, hiring people, for example, to help with harvesting or transporting or, drying and, using for poultry bedding. We were actually also able to make the argument that we had primary and even secondary economic benefits to job creation and increasing people's income levels. So that was kind of interesting. So again, I hope I've answered that question well. It's not just the nutrient removal that we reported on, and some of those other benefits were great. And if we quantified them, which we didn't, we'd get an even higher ROI, I'm sure.
Sounds good. Sounds like there's plenty of work for the research community to probably chip in and start helping out with some of that and that more granulated detail. So I think we're gonna wrap it up for today. I really appreciate Evan being here. It was an excellent talk. Thank you so much. Next week, September 4th, is the last seminar for I don't know, this session, I guess. It's Billy Murdoch again, talking about Miscanthus for erosion control, so another water quality application. So we also have Michelle just posted in the chat a link to where these webinars can be found online on YouTube. So make sure you check them out if you've missed any, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Thank you.